Everybody wants to find the next Steve Jobs, but I got a guy on the show today who found the first Steve Jobs, the original Steve Jobs. Nolan Bushnell is a legend in Silicon Valley. He's the founder of Atari and an entrepreneur in many other respects. Nolan, welcome to TechCrunch TV. Real honor to have you on.
It's great to be here.
So Nolan, you've written this book called Finding the Next Steve Jobs, but before we get to that, tell me something about Steve Jobs that you've never told anyone else.
Oh, I believe that Steve was a remarkable philosopher. And I don't think people think about that, but he was very adept at a great deal of the philosophy from the East. And one of the things that we really loved was talking. I was more of a rationalist and he was more of an Eastern mystic, and some great conversations.
I'm sure people have asked you this before, but did you ever imagine that this kind of crazy kid with this obsession with India and mysticism would become the major business figure of the 20th, early 21st century?
Well, I would be lying if I said, yes, I saw that. I saw him to be extraordinary, but the reality is I turned down a third of Apple computer for $50,000, which clearly was a mistake.
Nolan, I can't believe you've just, I'm sure you've said this before, but that makes my skin crawl a little bit. Anyway, you've been incredibly successful in your own right. I know you probably don't need much Apple stock, although I would have taken your third happily. So you've written this book, Nolan, Finding the Next Steve Jobs. Yeah. How do we find him? Because we need him big time.
Well, my thesis is that almost every company out there probably has a couple of Steve Jobses working for them, and that the creativity gap has to do with the corporate ecosystem more than the individuals. That there's creative individuals whose work product end up on the cutting room floor, and that's where we have to focus.
So where do we find those guys? They're the guys who are usually thrown out of companies, right?
Exactly. I think that there's too much of an emphasis on homogeneity in the workforce. And if you're going to do extraordinary things, you need it to be a little spiky.
So what needs to happen, Nolan? A lot of CEOs and corporate executives watching this show, everybody, of course, wants to find the next Steve Jobs. What do they need to do?
Say yes. They need to constantly have a series of small projects managed by quirky people doing what they consider to be strange things. I point out that true innovation almost never has a constituency. And so by saying yes to things that you think might be a little weird is the way you find those extraordinary jumps in creative thought.
But isn't that like winning the lottery? I mean, it only happens once in 1,000 or once in 10,000 times.
No, I think that it happens remarkably often if you try projects and if you have an ecosystem of trying things and letting them have just a little bit of life. Let the public be the arbiter, not the middle manager who really loves to say no.
Give me some examples, Nolan, of people you think who may not have turned out to be Steve Jobs, but who fit that model, who conform to your theory.
Oh, I think there are a lot of them. I think Tony Hsieh is doing some very extraordinary things with the Las Vegas Downtown project from Zappos. I'm a big believer in what's happening at Google right now. I believe their ancillary projects will swamp their current business. I mean, I think Google Glass is going to be extraordinary. I think the auto-drive cars, extraordinary. What they're doing in terms of geographic search, I think is extraordinary. They're doing a lot of the right things.
Interesting that you don't mention Apple.
I have not seen a lot of evolution or even revolution out of Apple. They're kind of stuck in theme and variation on the iPod. And I actually think the iPhone was actually an extension of the iPod ecology. And Apple should be, but, and I've recommended to Apple to do some other things, but they kind of have arrogance going on right now, and I think they're squandering their brand.
Some people describe Jack Dorsey of Twitter and Square as the next Steve Jobs. Does he fit into your model?
I think they're good. They're pretty good at it. Yeah, they're creating some interesting items, some interesting new ecosystems, and whether they're one or two trick ponies, we don't know. But I love their products so far. I think there are hundreds of Steve Jobs on Kickstarter right now, and I think that's a really wonderful environment.
Give me some examples of projects you've seen on Kickstarter that you're particularly encouraged by.
Oh, Oculus Rift. I think the Oculus project is extraordinary and going to be very, very important in the future.
If Steve Jobs was around today as an 18-year-old, what field do you think he would go into?
I believe that he would naturally gravitate to an online environment because there is still a massive amount of things that need to be done to make online existence more user-friendly. And Steve had a really wonderful penchant for ease of operation.
I don't know if you've seen it, Nolan. There's an interesting new book out by Malcolm Gladwell, David and Goliath, about what makes people really special. And Gladwell argues that you've got to have something really bad often happen in your life. Maybe you're suffering from a learning disability. Maybe your parents die early. Steve Jobs, of course, was adopted, although nothing that bad, I think, happened to him as a kid. Do you buy that theory about talent, about remarkable talent?
You know, I think there's some very good correlations with that. I know that in my own personal life, my dad died when I was 15, which was very traumatic for me. And, you know, I had a mother and three sisters, and so I felt like I kind of had to be on my own from the age 15. And it teaches you how to scramble in a very interesting way.
Nolan, you and I first met at the DLD conference a couple of years ago at Munich. And the Europeans, I think, struggle for the same kind of innovation that comes out of the US. Is there something special about America in terms of generating guys like Steve Jobs, or is it simply coincidental?
Oh, no, I think there's something magic because there's actually a critical mass of entrepreneurship. And one of the factors that I think is underrated is the fact that we have all worked next to somebody who started their own company or was running their own company, who we observe firsthand as being an idiot. And it gives us a lot of confidence that we know that we will make mistakes, but not nearly as many as the idiots that we worked for.
Nolan, finally, what's next for you? Your career has been remarkable. Now you're an author, very, very distinguished entrepreneur. What haven't you done that you'd still like to do?
There are three things that I want to do. First of all, I've got a company, BrainRush, which is doing some remarkable things in accelerating learning. We are teaching kids 10 times faster. We believe that we are going to be very, very important to the movement of schools from teacher-centric to technology-centric. Even though teachers are going to be still important, we make their lives so much better. I believe the Internet of Things is important, and I have a lot of interest in that and the security that's necessary for what I call Network 3.0, where everything is encrypted and you're just shipping keys around. Probably the third thing that I really still want to play with is the personal robot. I had a project that was way too early in '83 and '84, and I learned a lot about robots, and I I think the technology is ready, and I still feel like I want to do one of those.
Well, Nolan Bushnell, ever youthful, real honor to have you on TechCrunch TV on my show. And I really hope you'll be able to come back soon to tell me more about how your education and robot projects are working out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just go to brainrush.com and you can see how it's working.